Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 537. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. This is a second bonus episode for the week. There's just so much going on with Biden's wars right now that there's no way I could cover everything I want to cover in just the 3 episodes a week. And so this week we'll have 2 bonus episodes. I'm guessing for the foreseeable future, there's going to be at least a 4th episode every week to try to keep up with all the news going on. And so I appreciate you all tuning in. I know a lot of you are sharing the show. The show numbers are up. This past January was better than any month for the show since the Ukraine war really started going in February, March of 2022. So we're doing very well here at the show, and I know a lot of that uptick is because all of you, not only is there just an increased interest in foreign policy issues right now as Biden is starting wars all over the place, but all of you are taking the time to share the show and get it out there to more people, which I really appreciate. And also just in amplifying the show, you've amplified my profile some, and I've been able to do some more high-profile appearances. I will be back on with Judge Napolitano today. That's Thursday, February 1st at 2 p.m. Eastern time. So tune in live if you can. And if not, just check it out when you can. I feel like I always do pretty good on the Judge's show. All right, let's get into the news here on the show today. Kenyan President says force can be deployed to Haiti as early as next week. I wrote this one for the Institute on January 31st. The deployment of 1,000 Kenyan police officers to Haiti will move forward as soon as next week. Last week, the High Court in Nairobi issued a ruling that blocked the mission to Port-au-Prince. The U.S. is sponsoring the Kenyan-led multinational force to Haiti intended to break the hold gangs have over most of the capital city. The request for a multinational force to help restore order was made by Prime Minister Ariel Henry and has been met by protests from Haitians. So, after Haitian migrants began arriving in the U.S., the White House began attempting to form an international coalition to restore order in Haiti. After the assassination of the Haitian president in 2021, much of Port-au-Prince fell into the hands of gangs. Prime Minister Henry, who was pushed into power by Washington following the assassination, requested the UN send troops to Haiti to transfer power from the gangs to government forces. The Biden administration sought a country to lead the mission for over a year. After Nairobi agreed to lead the mission, Washington signed a new defense agreement with Kenya and agreed to finance the mission to Port-au-Prince. Last year, the UN Security Council approved the deployment. However, the plan has been met by opposition in Kenya and Haiti. In Kenya, the opposition leader filed a lawsuit with the country's high court to block the deployment. Last week, the court ruled in favor of the opposition leader. However, Kenyan President William Ruto indicated he would circumvent the ruling and move forward with the deployment to Haiti. Ruto explained to Reuters that Kenyan police would be deployed to Haiti as soon as next week. So this is the quote he gave to Reuters. So that mission can go ahead as soon as next week if all the paperwork is done between Kenya and Haiti on the bilateral route that has been suggested by the court. The paperwork Ruto is referring to is a bilateral agreement between Haiti and Kenya. The Miami Herald reported that Port-au-Prince and Nairobi are currently negotiating the pact. And so this would be some kind of, I guess, status of forces type agreement. Now, the opposition leader in Kenya says that the Kenyan forces cannot be deployed outside the country, even if a bilateral agreement is implemented. He posted on X, "We appreciate the wisdom of the justice who issued the ruling on service and force. As per law and constitution, you cannot deploy a police service outside of Kenya." And so the U.S. has tried to do a couple of, I think, mostly propaganda tactics here. One, the Kenyans and the other, countries that go in, and it's going to be mostly a Kenyan force, are going to be dubbed police officers, not military personnel. My guess is that there's a very, very small difference between the two, how it actually works out. And they're not going to be official UN peacekeepers. They're just going to be there under the UN banner. And so I think what the opposition leader is arguing is that you can't send police officers on a deployment to a foreign country. That's not what police officers do. And so Kenya either, I guess, needs to admit that this is a military force going overseas, or they're going to maybe hit some legal problems in Kenya. It'll be interesting to see how this develops. I have no idea with the politics of Kenya, as far as if maybe the president there just ignores the court all the time and it's really no big deal what they say. Or maybe, this is going to lead to some mass uprising and protest. I have seen some protest in Kenya recently, but this seems to be more around the abuse and treatment of women in Kenya than the situation in Haiti. I conclude my article here by mentioning that Haitians have protested against Henry, requesting the UN deployment. Peacekeepers in Haiti have a legacy of rampant sexual abuse and causing a cholera outbreak that killed thousands. And there have been, protests in the streets. Various Haitian groups have written letters to the U.S., to Biden, to Henry, demanding that this doesn't go forward. But again, the U.S. wants to stop the migrants, and Henry wants to have power. So it seems like we're going in that direction. All right, next up here, another one I wrote for the Institute on January 31st. Doing a little coverage in this hemisphere. Diplomatic process between U.S. and Venezuela breaks down. The first steps of a path aimed at improving ties between the U.S. and Venezuela have been abandoned. Washington has reimposed sanctions on Venezuela and threatened more. Venezuelan officials say the country will block deportation flights from the U.S. Last October, the U.S. and Venezuela agreed to improve bilateral ties. Under President Donald Trump, the U.S. imposed an economic war against Venezuela and attempted to remove President Nicolas Maduro in a series of coups. Biden agreed to lift sanctions on Venezuela's gold and oil sector, and Maduro agreed to accept Venezuelan deportations from the U.S. On Monday, the Treasury Department reimposed sanctions on Venezuela's state mining company. Washington said the move was in response to the Venezuelan Supreme Court removing two Venezuelan opposition leaders' eligibility to run for president. Journalist Ryan Grimm asked State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller about the seeming hypocrisy of sanctioning Venezuela for barring presidential candidates from running, but not condemning Pakistan after former President Imran Khan was jailed, and he was jailed for 14 years, I believe the sentence is. Additionally, the White House has not called for Donald Trump to be reinstated to balance in May in Colorado after he was removed. And so there's some pretty transparent hypocrisy there. This is just about punishing Venezuela and looking for an excuse. The State Department is also threatening that if Venezuela does not restore the candidate's eligibility, sanctions on the oil industry will be reimposed. And so the way the U.S. lifted sanctions on Venezuela's oil industry, it was a temporary removal, and so that would have to be, they have to grant a waiver to continue to have the sanctions not apply to Venezuela. And I believe that date for that waiver expiration is April 13th. And so the State Department is basically saying that Venezuela has till then, or else they will reimpose the sanctions on the oil and gas sector. Venezuela says that if the sanctions are reimposed, that as early as 2 weeks from now, they would begin blocking deportation flights from the U.S. The Venezuelan vice president posted on X, if they made the mistake of intensifying the economic aggression against Venezuela at the request of their extremist lackeys, reparation flights for Venezuelan migrants will be immediately revoked as of February 13th. In recent decades, Washington has attempted a series of coups and waged economic warfare against the communist government in Venezuela with little success. Maduro remains popular in Venezuela. However, the economic wars have had a significant impact on Venezuelans, contributing to poverty and tens of thousands of deaths. And, I do know, and I'm not saying that Maduro doesn't bear fault, corruption and communism in Venezuela for the poverty and deaths as well. But the U.S. sanctions have certainly exacerbated the problem, and the constant attempted coups have exacerbated the problems quite a bit. All right, next up here, this one from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, January 30th. U.S. to deploy nukes in the UK for the first time in 15 years. The U.S. will deploy nuclear weapons to the UK for the first time in 15 years in a move Russia will view as a provocation, the Telegraph reported, citing Pentagon documents. Pentagon procurement contracts show that the U.S. is planning to station B-61-12 nuclear warheads at RAF Lakenheath, a base in Suffolk, England. The U.S. pulled its nuclear weapons out of the UK in 2008, and the decision to redeploy them demonstrates the low state of U.S.-Russian relations. According to The Telegraph, Russia said the deployment of nukes to the UK would be viewed as an escalation that would require compensating countermeasures. The U.S. has already stationed nuclear weapons in Germany, Belgium, Italy, Turkey, and the Netherlands as a part of NATO's nuclear sharing program. Last year, Russia announced it was deploying nuclear weapons to Belarus amid tensions over the proxy war in Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin pointed to NATO's nuclear sharing program to justify his decision. The B-61 is the U.S.'s primary nuclear gravity bomb. The B-61-12 is the newest iteration of the weapon. It's considered a tactical nuclear weapon, which have lower yields than strategic warheads, but the B-61-12 has a maximum yield of 50 kilotons, more than 3 times as powerful as the bomb that the U.S. dropped on Hiroshima, Japan. Next up here, another article that I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on January 31st, U.S. to begin shipping long-range bombs to Ukraine. Washington plans to ship its first batch of ground-launched long-range bombs to Kiev this week. The arms were designed for Ukrainian military and will give Kiev another option for deep strikes. The new weapons was developed by Boeing and Saab. It combines a 250-pound glide bomb intended to be launched by an aircraft and straps it to a rocket motor. Washington believes it has a range of about 90 miles. Boeing and Saab pitched the combining the GBU-39 small-diameter bomb with the M26 rocket motor in November of 2022. President Joe Biden approved the transfer of the long-range bomb to Ukraine in February 2023. However, the delivery of the munitions was delayed because it needed to be developed and tested. Politico spoke with 4 officials who confirmed the first batch would arrive in Ukraine this week. The officials touted the weapon as giving Ukraine a significant capability. A U.S. official said it gives them deeper strike capability they hadn't had. Its components, their long-range fire arsenal. It's just an extra arrow in the quiver that's going to allow them to do more. So this is, the significance of this weapon is yet to be seen. The UK and France and Germany, I believe, have all transferred Ukraine cruise missiles with a range of about 150 miles, and the U.S. has also sent Ukraine a small batch of ATACMS cluster munitions with a range of, I think, over 100 miles. And so it's not that this weapon is going to be a particular extension of Ukraine's current capabilities. However, the problem Ukraine has is their weapon stockpiles are running very low. And so if they don't have many of those cruise missiles left, this may be something they could choose to hit different targets. I think they only got 20 of the ATACMS when the U.S. sent them. And so again, this could either free up their use or this could be something they would use to hit rather than the ATACMS. I guess we'll see how these weapons operate. I wonder if they're going to be subject to a lot of electronic warfare, given that it's going to be a rocket motor that has to propel these things, up into the air. I'm sure a few miles downrange, and then, that will activate the small diameter 250-pound bomb glide features to guide it down to its target. So it would seem like it would be susceptible to electronic warfare, so that might be something that interferes with this weapon. But given Ukraine's constraints on their weapons depot, it may be beneficial to them on the battlefield. It also just depends on how many the U.S. is sending them. There's no indication on how many of these bombs will be sent to Ukraine. If it's only 20, it's probably not going to be a big difference. If it's thousands, then it could have an impact on the battlefield. So Ukrainian forces recently conducted strikes deep in Russian territory on civilian targets. Earlier this month, at least 27 people were killed in a Ukrainian attack on a market on the outskirts of the city Donetsk in the Russian-controlled portion of the Donetsk Oblast. While the bombs may give Ukraine another option for deep strikes, it does not fill the massive gaps in Kiev's war needs. Ukraine is running short on manpower. Additionally, frontline troops lack artillery shells to fight back advancing Russian forces, and Kiev is short on air defense interceptors to protect its key infrastructure. Ukraine's Western backers are facing multiple hurdles to providing Kiev with more weapons. In Washington, the White House is gridlocked with Republicans in Congress on a supplemental defense spending bill that includes $61 billion in aid for Ukraine. However, even if the legislation is passed, Western reserves of 155mm artillery shells and air defense interceptors are nearly depleted. So, again, this is, maybe going to help Ukraine a little bit, but it's certainly not what Ukraine needs to reverse the trend going on in this war. Next up here is maybe a really important story. We'll see how this all plays out. Zalinski expected to oust his top general. Ukrainian President Zalinski is expected to fire Ukraine's top general, Zaluzhny, a move that could backfire due to Zaluzhny's popularity within Ukraine. Ukrainian media outlets reported that Zalinski told Zaluzhny that he would be moved to another post, but the general refused to step down as commander-in-chief. Other reports said that Zalinski told Zaluzhny he would be fired, but for now he remains in his position. Zelensky's office has denied that there was a conversation about Zaluzhny's firing, but Ukrainian sources speaking to the media said it was just a matter of time before the general is sacked. Sources told Politico that the reason why he has been spared so far is because Zelensky is afraid of creating a powerful new political rival. I also imagine that, kind of given what we have heard recently from the Washington Post about what the Biden administration wants Ukraine to do this year, which is just try to hold the territory it has, and what we know about the split between Zelensky and Zaluzhny, which is largely based on the fact that Zaluzhny, being the military commander-in-chief, is, I think, has a much more realistic view of the battlefield and sees holding territory as, a hard enough challenge for the Ukrainians at this point, and, the war being maybe a stalemate at best for the Ukrainians, where Zelensky, of course, wants to retake all of Ukraine, including the Crimean Peninsula, and has these very bold and very deep objectives. And so, it would seem that Zaluzhny's view of what is to happen is far more in line with what Ukraine's Western backers are. And so maybe that pressure keeps Zaluzhny in his place if, Biden gets on the phone and says that this guy is really important to us providing you with support. Next up here, China complains about detention and deportation of Chinese students attempting to enter the U.S. LPS reports the Chinese government has protested the United States over the treatment of Chinese arriving to study in America, saying they had been interrogated for hours, had their electronic devices checked, and in some cases were forcibly deported from the country. The Chinese embassy statement said the affected students had their electronic devices checked, were prohibited from communing with anyone outside, and in some cases held for more than 10 hours. The Chinese ambassador in Washington said when they landed at the airport, what awaited them was an 8-hour-long interrogation by officers who prohibited them from contacting their parents, made groundless accusations against them, and even forcibly repatriated them and banned their entry. This is absolutely unacceptable. And so, I think one of the real strengths between the U.S. and China relationship is the student exchange relationship. And this is something that could cause that to dry up, which would be a negative. But it's also something that might create a lot of animosity among young Chinese towards America. And if you're a student that's studying in the U.S., let's say you come into the country, they interrogate you for 10 hours, they go for your phone, they embarrass you, they make you feel humiliated, and you absolutely are, furious with the way you were treated when you entered America. Maybe that makes it more likely that when you go back to China, you're going to be willing to work with the Chinese government against the American government. This could create a lot of anti-American sentiment among the students that are studying here in the United States. It seems to be a mistake to be so indiscriminate and so harsh, but that's the way the U.S. government acts, unfortunately. All right. So I got a couple stories here on the situation in Gaza. They're both from mainstream outlets, and it's probably the most I'm going to quote mainstream outlets on this show. But these are two very important articles. And I think a part of the reason that these articles are important is because it's CNN and The Guardian. And when CNN says, hey, there's this large-scale famine that's been caused in Gaza, and when The Guardian says that, 2/3 of the the structures in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed by Israel, you can't call somebody who cites that an anti-Semite, right? Like, that's just, it doesn't work. It doesn't appeal. And so I thought it was worth it to go through these two articles. So the CNN one first, this one is on the famine, and our spotlight article today, again, it's Thursday, February 1st at antiwar.com, is an article from Daniel Larison's Substack. And he kind of breaks down this article and a few other reports on the severity and the crisis situation going on in Gaza. So CNN reports, as Gaza spiraled towards full-scale famine, displaced civilians and health workers told CNN they go hungry so their children can eat with what little is available. If Palestinians find water, it's likely undrinkable. When relief trucks trickle into the strip, people climb over each other to grab aid. Children living on the streets after being forced from their homes by Israeli bombardment cry and fight over stale bread. Others reportedly walk hours in the cold searching for food, risking exposure to Israeli strikes. Israel's bombardment and siege since October 7th has drastically diminished vital supplies in Gaza, leaving the entire population of some 2.2 million exposed to high levels of acute food insecurity or worse, according to the Integrated Food Security and Nutrition Phase Classification, IPC, which assesses global food insecurity and malnutrition. Margaret Griffiths, the UN Emergency Relief Corps chief, told CNN that a great majority of the 400,000 Gazans characterized by the UN agencies as at risk from starvation are actually in famine. The UN human rights experts have warned that Israel is destroying Gaza's food system and using food as a weapon against the Palestinian people. Over more than 100 days, Palestinians in Gaza have seen mass displacement, neighborhoods turned to ash and rubble, entire families erased by war, a surge in deadly disease, and the medical system wrecked by bombardment. Now starvation and dehydration are a major threat to survival. We are dying slowly, reflected El Jamara, a mother in Rafah. I think it's even better to die from the bombs. At least we will be martyrs. But now we are just dying of hunger and thirst. Israeli strikes on Gaza since October 7th have killed at least 26,637 people. As of the writing of this article, I think it's now just over 27,000. And that's the official count. We know the actual toll is higher. A physical therapist displaced to Rafah remembers the day his colleague was killed trying to get water for his family. He said the man was queuing at a water station in Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza when he and dozens of others were struck by Israeli bombardment. Unfortunately, many relatives and families are still in northern Gaza Strip suffering a lot. A father of three told CNN they eat grass and drink polluted water. Israel's blockade and restrictions on aid deliveries mean stocks are desperately low, driving up prices and making food inaccessible to people across Gaza. Shortages are even worse in northern parts of the Strip, according to the UN, where Israel's concentrated its military offensive in the early days of the war. Communication blackouts stifle efforts to report on starvation and dehydration in the region. A Palestinian said people butchered a donkey to eat meat. He said his friends in Jabalito told him this earlier this month that the shortages have worsened. A woman carrying a toddler on her knee while comforting her other children and grandchildren, who says she stays awake each day screaming for food. She told CNN, in the shelters, there's not enough food. The sun sets on us and we haven't had any lunch. There are no drinks, no clean water, no clean bathrooms. The kids cry for a biscuit and we can't even find any to give her. The scale and speed of the potential famine in Gaza will consign child survivors to a lifetime of health risks, said Rebecca Ingles, an intensive care doctor in Britain who regularly visits Gaza to teach medical students. The first 1,000 days of a child's life are absolutely critical for physical growth and cognitive development, Inglis told CNN. Malnourished children have an 11-fold increase of risk of dying compared to well-nourished children. Vitamin and mineral deficiencies force the body into emergency shutdown state where it loses the ability to make energy, put on weight, or maintain kidney and liver functions. Malnourished children, especially those with severe acute malnutrition, are at greater risk of dying from illness like diarrhea and pneumonia, according to the WHO. Cases of diarrhea in children under the age of 5 have increased about 2,000% since October 7th, UNICEF reported. One man reported that his own children have diarrhea, cold, and flu symptoms. He said the children's bodies are dehydrated, their skin is dehydrated. In times of severe stress, pregnant women are more likely to miscarry or give birth prematurely. Healthcare workers previously told CNN Gaza is home to 50,000 pregnant women. According to the United Nations Pollution Fund, babies who do not survive in utero are more likely to be born who do survive in utero are more likely to be born underweight and are therefore at higher risk of dying. Starving and dehydrated mothers cannot provide enough breast milk for their babies. And so, I mean, the horrors of what's going on, particularly for the pregnant mothers in Gaza, is really even difficult to talk about. I read a story yesterday where a woman gave birth in a public bathroom and then her baby died because there's no medical care. That's, that was the best place she could go to give birth, and the baby didn't make it. All right, next up, here's the article from The Guardian. Satellite evidence shows Israel destroying entire neighborhoods in Gaza. The Guardian reports, a Guardian investigation has detailed the mass destruction of buildings and land in 3 neighborhoods in Gaza. Using satellite imagery and open source evidence, the investigation found damage to more than 250 residential buildings, 17 schools and universities, 16 mosques, 3 hospitals, 3 cemeteries, and 150 agricultural greenhouses. Entire buildings have been leveled, fields flattened, and places of worship wiped off the map in the course of Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza, launched after the Hamas attack on October 7th. The destruction has not only forced 1.9 million people to leave their homes, but also made it impossible for many to return. This has led to some experts to describe what is happening in Gaza as Domicide, defined as widespread deliberate destruction of homes to make it uninhabitable, preventing the return of displaced people. This concept is not recognized in law, which it's really stupid. One of the things of the critiques I have with this article is they focus on this domicide argument when it's just ethnic cleansing, right? Like, making the land uninhabitable for people is ethnically cleansing them from that land, but rather than call it that, they use this other term that I don't think is very popular or widely recognized or even a legal term. So, kind of unfortunate, but the actual survey of what they do is what I think is important here. So, Beit Hanun, a city in northeast Gaza surrounded by agricultural land, was home to about 50,000 people in 2017. The Israeli Defense Forces announced full control over the area in December. The area was depopulated and several neighborhoods reduced to rubble. Swaths of agricultural land had been erased, visible in satellite imagery from Planet Labs taken on November 30th. Most of the agricultural greenhouses have been destroyed, and new paths from armored vehicles are now soon sown across the growing area. An analyst from UNOSAT in December found that 39% of agricultural land in North Gaza had been damaged. An entire residential neighborhood of more than 150 buildings had been flattened. Also destroyed were schools, including one run by the UN that was blown up by the Israeli forces in mid-December. In the town, hospitals have been severely damaged, and in the Balsam hospital has been destroyed. Under international humanitarian law, schools and hospitals are protected civilian objects, and the principles of distinction and proportionality apply when targeting them. The Guardian analysis found that a cemetery, bulldozed, and mosques were damaged and destroyed. Among them is the al-Nasser Mosque, parts of which date back to 1239, which was damaged. By zooming in on the town further, the scale of the damage becomes clear to see. And what it is actually they're describing in this right here is in the article, which I would suggest everybody go and check out actually on the Guardian website, because they do actually highlight the areas that were damaged and destroyed and provide you pictures so you could really see everything. So, But it says many of the fields have evidence of damage from Israeli military activity, but some visible differences in color can be attributed to variations of seasonal crop growth. The next town they talk about is Al-Zahara, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods located in central Gaza. It was home to tower blocks, universities, and about 5,000 people before the war. To the north is a large wastewater treatment plant surrounded by armored vehicle tracks over flattened farmlands. New paths and fortifications carved out by Israeli forces have emerged over an older network of roads, and they can no longer be seen or are recognizable. So, they're literally erasing this town off the map. With that wastewater treatment plant, by the way, there was another report, I believe it was in France 24, where they interviewed somebody from a Dutch peace organization called PATS, and he pointed out that Israel had destroyed all the solar panels at that wastewater treatment facility. To the east of Zahara is a town with a large crater is all that is left of one building, while nearby school buildings have visible damage. Crater roads around the Turkish-Palestinian Friendship Hospital. The hospital reported blast damage to 2 rooms and its oxygen and water supply. The heart of Al-Zahara sits 3 universities, mostly damaged and surrounded by craters. Of them, Isra University was blown up by Israeli forces this month, and this is the one we talked about on the show where Matthew Lee from the Associated Press really pressed Matthew Miller, the State Department press spokesperson, on this, and Miller kind of dismissed it and tried to claim that there was a Hamas tunnel underneath the facility, and that's why they blew it up. The Al-Zahara tower blocks were reportedly home to more than 3,000 people, and they were flattened by Israeli bombing. Khan Yunis in southern Gaza sits at the edge of Israel's former evacuation line. Initially considered a safe zone, the city took in fleeing and injured civilians when the war's focus was in the north, but it has been relentlessly bombed since December after the IDF expanded its campaign. The Guardian analysis found multiple mosques destroyed beyond recognition, alongside destroyed greenhouses and residential blocks. Another sports ground has been destroyed, alongside an entire residential area with residential buildings and agricultural fields. Large craters and rubble remain where more than 100 greenhouses once stood. Pharmacies, supermarkets, schools, and a kindergarten show signs of damage. Cratered roads surrounded the Al-Bandar al-Sharik hospital. Khan Yunis refugee camp, home to 41,000 people in 2017, was established after the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, which really what they're referring to there is the Nakba. The camp, which hosts several UN buildings, including UNRWA school, took several hits and shows signs of damage. So for anybody who's watching, you can see here, this is a map that was produced by The Guardian, and the areas in red are buildings that were damaged or destroyed by the Israeli strikes. And you can see, it's most of northern Gaza, but really a good amount of southern Gaza too. And the estimates are now that 50 to 62% of all buildings in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed. All right, now let's get into what's going to happen in the rest of the Middle East here. The response to the 3 U.S. soldiers that were killed in Jordan. This from Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com, January 31st. Report, U.S. plans week-long bombing campaign against Iranian targets. U.S. officials told NBC News that the U.S. is planning to launch a weeks-long bombing campaign in the Middle East in retaliation for the drone attack in northeast Jordan that killed 3 American soldiers. The officials said that the targets were expected to include Iranian targets outside Iran, and the campaign will involve strikes and cyber operations. Other reports have said the U.S. is considered targeting Iranians in Iraq and Syria or the Iranian Navy. While the potential targets are not inside Iran, direct attacks on Iranian military could provoke a full-blown war between the U.S. and Iran. The U.S. is considering taking this course of action, even though the Pentagon admitted it has no evidence Iran was directly involved in the attack in Jordan. The Pentagon said that the Jordan attack had footprints of complete Hezbollah, one of the main Shia militias in Iraq. The U.S. says that Iran is responsible only because the arms complete Hezbollah and other Shia militias because it gives them arms. U.S. officials told the New York Times that while Iran arms and funds the Shia militias, there is no evidence that Tehran is calling the shots. While the National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby said Wednesday that U.S. intelligence suggests that the drone attack was carried out by the Islamic Resistance of Iraq, a shadowy umbrella group of Iraqi Shia militias. The Islamic Resistance has taken credit for many of the 160 attacks that have been launched against U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria since mid-October. The attacks started in response to the U.S. support for the Israeli slaughter in Gaza. Kirby also hinted at the possibility of a drawn-out bombing campaign. He said, the first thing you see won't be the last thing, he said, adding that it won't be a one-off. Iran has vowed to respond to any U.S. attacks on Iranians in the region. The Islamic Republic would decisively respond to any attack on the country, its interests, and nationals under any pretext, said Amir Saeed, Iran's ambassador to the United Nations. So we seem primed for an escalation here. And of course, you would think a major issue with all this would be that they don't have authority to conduct a large war against Iran in the Middle East, even if that is in Iraq and Syria. All right, another one from Dave DeCampia report. Iraqi government, Iran pressured complete Hezbollah to stop attacks on the U.S. The Iraqi government and Iran pressured complete Hezbollah and other Iraqi Shia militias to suspend attacks on the U.S. forces in an effort to de-escalate tensions in the region, Reuters reported on Wednesday. KH, one of Iraq's main Shia militias, announced on Tuesday that it was suspending its operations against the U.S. because it didn't want to embarrass the Iraqi government. In a statement, KH said that Iran had repeatedly declared opposition to our escalation against the U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria. And so this is not only a case where you have the Iranians, not directing these Iraqi Shia militias, but you actively telling them to knock it off and to tone it down, and yet the U.S. still blames Iran for it. Absolutely absurd. The Islamic Resistance in Iraq claimed most of the 160 strikes that have been launched against the U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria are a response to the U.S. support for the Israeli slaughter in Gaza. The group has not officially taken credit for killing 3 U.S. troops, but said it launched attacks in Syria near the Jordanian border that day. According to Reuters, killing the U.S. troops in Jordan was a step too far for the Iraqi government. Advisor to the Iraqi Prime Minister confirmed that the Iraqi government were to de-escalate and get the Shia militias to agree not to attack the U.S. So you have to wonder if the Shia militias were ever really trying to kill American forces. It's important to remember that this drone strike only was able to get through the U.S. air defenses because the U.S. had another drone approaching at the time, and I guess there was confusion about which one was an enemy, or I guess, that one could be an enemy drone or something like that. All right, next up here, Representative Massie hints at impeachment if Biden starts a war with Iran. Representative Thomas Massie, the Republican from Kentucky, the best member of the House of Representatives, on Wednesday appeared to threaten to pursue the impeachment of President Biden if he started a war with Iran. Massie posted a video from 2007 on X of then-Senator Biden threatening President George W. Bush with impeachment if he went to war with Iran without congressional approval. Biden said in the video, "I made it clear to the president that if he takes this nation into war with Iran without congressional approval, I will make it my business to impeach him." In his post, Massie wrote, in 2007, Biden put president on notice that he would impeach him for going to war with Iran without congressional approval. Consider this your notice, President Biden. Massie's post came amid reports that President Biden is planning to launch a weeks-long bombing campaign that could target Iranian assets outside of Iran in response to a drone attack in Jordan that killed 3 U.S. soldiers. So very, very concerning about how much we are getting escalation here. Now, there's also lawmakers concerned about what Biden is doing in Yemen. This from January 28th. House lawmakers tell Biden he must seek authorization to bomb Yemen. Nearly 30 bipartisan members of the House have sent a letter to President Biden urging him to get authorization from Congress before launching more strikes against the Houthis in Yemen. The letter, led by Reps. Ro Khanna, a Democrat from California, and Warren Davison, a Republican from Ohio, said President Biden was violating the Constitution by launching a war against the Houthis. But do you think Biden's concerned? Doesn't seem so. U.S. launches 11th round of strikes against Houthis in Yemen. This from Dave DeCampo on January 31st. The U.S. launched more strikes against the Houthis on Wednesday, marking it the 11th time the U.S. has targeted Yemen since President Biden started bombing the country on January 12th. U.S. Central Command claimed the strikes targeted Houthi surface-to-air missiles. U.S. forces identified the missiles in the Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen and determined that it presented an imminent threat to U.S. aircraft. So this is reminds me so much of one of my favorite Ron Paul stories when I think this was in the 1990s when they were looking at justification for bombing Iraq and claiming it was self-defense. The Clinton administration would tell Congress, well, they're shooting at our airplanes. And Ron Paul would say, what are they doing shooting at our airplanes? What are airplanes doing flying over Iraq and bombing them? That's why they're shooting at us. And so it seems to be very much these dynamics here where, the U.S. is now bombing Yemen only because it's bombing Yemen. All right. Two more articles here. White House gives mixed answers about U.S. troop presence in Yemen. So this is from Ken Klippenstein with The Intercept, and kind of annoying. He calls the Houthis rebels, which you would assume that, not that you expect a lot from Ken Klippenstein, but that he's better than that on this issue, but apparently he's not. So he writes in The Intercept, amid a raft of U.S. strikes targeting Houthi rebels in Yemen, the Pentagon has boots on the ground in the country, a fact that the Department of Defense has recently refused to acknowledge. A small number of U.S. military personnel are deployed to Yemen to conduct operations against Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and ISIS, the White House told Congress in its most recent War Powers report in a new tab on December 7th. This month, the U.S. began a military campaign against the Houthis for attacking shipping in the Red Sea, a move that the Yemeni rebels said was aimed at getting Israel to end its assault on the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. As the U.S. began to attack, defense officials suddenly became more racine about American military presence in Yemen. In a press conference on January 17th, the Pentagon Press Secretary Brigadier General Pat Ryder was asked if he could give assurances that the U.S. had no troops on the ground in Yemen. Ryder said, "I'm not aware of any U.S. forces on the ground." So that's a very interesting way to say yes to a question that you would like to answer no to, but you cannot. All right, last up here is potentially a major step towards war in West Africa. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger announced exit from Economic Community of West African States. So 3 African nations said they will leave the ECOWAS bloc. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger were also suspended from ECOWAS after military leaders seized power in those countries in recent years. The 3 countries were also sanctioned by the bloc. In his statement on their exit from ECOWAS, they blasted the sanctions as inhumane and irresponsible and a violation of the bloc's own rules. The country added that ECOWAS was acting under the control of foreign governments, likely referring to the U.S. and France. Military coups in West African states that occurred after the 2001 U.S. war in Libya led to a massive expansion of violent jihadists in West Africa and destabilized the region. And so now military have taken charge in these countries. These countries have been sanctioned. There's been talks about wars and invasions in this region for maybe the whole past year now. So I'm not exactly saying that I think that's on the brink or it's going to happen, but this does seem like a potential major step down that road, and a reason we should at least be keeping our eyes on the news coming out of West Africa for the foreseeable future to make sure that there's not a major escalation there, while everybody, is rightfully paying attention to the situation in Gaza, Ukraine, and even Haiti. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show today. I will be back with one more show this weekend, of course, stuff next week, and check out my appearance on Judge Napolitano's show, Judging Freedom, later today. Thanks.